feels like they're in a room. Like you have that experience, right? So Bendeth was talking about more of the performance.
Yep.
The Lost was talking more about the track. And he's not, like, the similarities are, he's not going to go in there and say, hey, man, this song needs like 16 guitar parts. It's like, no, we recorded 2 guitar parts. How do we make the most of this? So very similar, different approaches. And, like, you know, the interviewer is asking the Lost about overproducing and stuff like that. And he goes, maybe. He goes, I might overproduce sometimes. He goes, but if the track calls for it, the track calls for it. And he's like, we'll listen to before and after. And if it doesn't excel or bring the product to life, then we won't make those changes. He's like, but sometimes we do get saturated. Sometimes things get really gnarly. And he's like, it's just bringing the most out of the track, though. That's the slight difference.
Yeah.
So I'm curious as to what your thoughts on either of those would be, just from those statements.
Well, I mean, okay, so I'm very familiar with David Bendeth. I'm not as familiar with The Lost. I want to now. Like, people will kind of like hate on Bendeth from time to time because he's been a part of very successful things, and that seems to be the case. He was kind of like the, I would say, like, if you were a punk band or a heavy band and you wanted to get successful, from like when he started on Red Jumpsuit Apparatus, he had done like SR-71 was like the first record that I had heard from him, which was a really cool band if you've never heard them.
You showed me them.
And then after that was Red Jumpsuit Apparatus. And then his big like takeoff one of where like everybody in the world noticed was Riot from Paramore.
Paramore, yeah.
And because he changed drums, like
Yeah.
just as a concept, drums changed that day.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, if you listen to the drum kits before, like on SR-71 and Red Jumpsuit, it's like he's doing the same thing.
They're similar.
But he found a snare drum sound and a kick drum sound that was just different than whatever was out there.
Yeah.
And he has a very cool way of mixing drums that makes the drum very hyperbolic. Like it's just bigger than you think a drum should be.
Yeah.
And he kind of began that trend. And yeah, it just changed snare drums forever, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But in terms of the way that he approaches songs, I think there's like a big battle between him and other producer mixer people, in terms of how he approached things and because he just thinks I think he thinks everybody else is wrong.
You think so?
A little bit.
Just to that point, I saw a couple things where he was like, "My way works," and I don't really fucking care what everyone else thinks.
That's what I mean, right? Like it's like I know what I'm doing,
Yeah.
and I'm doing it in a way that I like.
And I'm sure you all got your thing going on, but he's like,
But
"I got
every
my thing
time,
going on."
so like it was funny because like he did the Paramore Riot record, and then the next Paramore record was mixed by CLA, and there was this like big comparison.
Oh,
Chris
I bet.
Lord-Alge,
Yeah.
which is like big time rock mixer, Green Day, all this stuff.
big drum kit sounds and snare drum sounds too. But
And like technically, he was from much smaller, like Bendeth scale wise, much smaller artist, like much smaller mixer at the time, producer, and he was coming out of Detroit, which is kind of like, no, not Detroit, New Jersey. He had a studio in New Jersey, but he was originally from Toronto. But they were mixing and recording in New Jersey, I believe, at the time. And his success with Paramore's Riot, and then all of a sudden the next record being mixed by CLA, which wasn't a bad sounding record. It just wasn't Riot.
yeah,
And there was this kind of idea of like who's right, I guess would be the best way of saying it. And I know Bendeth was way more, I would say, opinionated about how Riot was going to be done. Like if you listen to the harmonies, all the harmonies are digital.
Oh, really?
All of them.
Interesting.
Like if you ever just get
Because they
a
only
chance
have one singer.
yeah.
Yeah.
And rather than have her sing it, it's the track melodined to the notes that need to be.
Interesting.
So if you listen to, and I mean, it's out there, so you can listen to the vocal only Paramore Riot.
Yeah.
Listen to that and then go, whoa, what's happening?
Yeah.
Because he didn't care that it sounded melodyne and weird. He'd stack 7 parts at times and just make the thing, because it was about like, I don't know. He is kind of like, why wouldn't you make it a hit? Why wouldn't you make it good?
Yeah.
And I watched shortly after that, he did a couple of different records for a couple of different bands, but then he mixed the Underoath record. That is my absolute favorite record they've ever done. And it was very controversial because they had this pop mixer, right? And they were this like grungy band that like were, it's a different vibe.
Early
And
Underoath, yeah.
they felt like they would get kind of laughed out of the world that they were in if they went with Pop Guy, because he was into Breaking Benjamins and stuff at that time and was like getting real successful. And I watched the documentary The Making of, and his thing, they were having this argument with the band and Bendeth, and the drummer was on Bendeth's side because he,
wanted big drums.
Well, yeah, he wanted big drums, obviously. But the thing that he said to them, he was just like, he's like, why don't you try writing one hit?
Oh shit.
And I was like, oh man, because they were arguing that their music is great.
Yeah.
And he was just like, yeah, totally. But like, why wouldn't you just write one?
Yeah.
Because like this idea of like, let people in, like make it so that people can hear it.
Yeah.
And yeah, you like your raw thing, and you don't, he had said like, these are the guys that rather than take showers, they would want to go bathe in the river.
Yeah.
And it's like, he's like, that's all well and good. I get it. But like, make one.
Yeah.
And then pay to do all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And so for him, it was like this very pragmatic thing of like, why don't we make you successful?
Yeah.
And I don't disagree with how he goes about it personally, because I think it's presenting the art in a way that is like pretty dope, in my opinion. I think he's a great producer.
Digestible, right?
Digestible, and like, but I don't think it sacrifices what the band is. Like nobody listens to Paramore and goes like, man, they really sold out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Riot wasn't a sellout record.
No, absolutely not.
Breaking Benjamins wasn't a sellout record, but like they're not viewed that way
It like set
conceptually.
the bar for something though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like, I don't think he thinks of what he does as overproducing at all. I think it's like I think it's Bendething or something. Like this is like, well, why wouldn't we do this? Why wouldn't we make it big? Why wouldn't we like swing for the hills? I don't know.
Well, and like, you start thinking about what it takes to make that snare drum sound the way that snare drum sounds. And it has to have elements of the quote unquote live room or whatever. You have to make it big enough to give it room to be that big.
Well, like the interesting thing about Bendeth, now understanding a little bit more of what he does, yes, he will sample each individual drum so he can bump them up.
Yeah.
And like if you listen to the records, like you can hear the raw drums, and then there's the hyped up sample on top of the thing to push it forward, and you can hear him pull that in and out. And it's just from making it so that like as guitars get louder, basses get louder, vocals get louder, you need the thing to be able to still do the thing that it's supposed to do, right? So
Crack
like if
and
the
keep
world,
time or whatever.
the world gets louder, well, everything needs to get a little bit louder.
Yeah.